After securing the Trippy colony, which happened to be the only large planetoid in that entire sector, which made it Trippy 1, everybody got to work on the next part, which is altering the Trippy station to make it something that humanity could actually use. They had to widen many of the doorways, many of the hallways, because they got tired of clanking the top of their helmets on every single doorway they came through. The Ponchu were vicious, but they were also rather small. Basically like a walking electric chihuahua is what everybody seemed to call them. As they worked on this, humanity itself went over to the Toes planet and tried to help salvage what they could. The crashing of the ship caused major disruptions. Not a lot of damage as where it landed. However, the fact that there was now a giant ash cloud in space that was basically just powdered concrete made things difficult. Human medical technology had increased by leaps and bounds. Hell, it had jumped the line so far that people couldn't see it from the line anymore. Because of this, they could help out many of the Toes get through diseases, get through issues, get through injuries that could be completely lethal. This is what the Toes were grateful for. Among everything else, they were grateful that humanity had come to keep them alive. They would most likely be nothing more than a food source at this point if they had not received any help. And they realized that this is what hospitality gets them. So they were always as gracious as possible, offering humans even the most meager of items that they had to spare. Even if they couldn't spare it, they still would offer. Yet most humans wouldn't take it. In fact, humans would usually raise their hand and with the other hand give something else. Handing supplies, foodstuffs, clean water, toiletries even. Anything that they would need for basics were immediately given over to the Toes, and once again, they were grateful. As they very slowly began to rebuild, they were also grateful for the amount of human volunteers, not just military, as they were busy with the Trippy station and making sure that the secured areas stayed secured. The amount of personnel that showed up of their own free will, giving up their own time, which to most humans was something they had in extreme abundance, but also resources that had to be harvested off of different asteroid fields, off different comets, off anything else, but they still brought it in, and they were using molecular assemblers to make sure that they could have all that the Toes needed. And to this, they could not thank enough. It got to the point where many of the Toes actually began to bow to humans. And humans always raised a hand and says, yeah, we don't do that. And don't ever do that here. This is your home planet. We're just here to help you up and run again. Ren had hurried back to his home planet and rallied everyone together. His words of confidence, his words of care, his words of thanks were enough to keep all the population from, well, completely freaking the hell out, which they had every right to do so. Not only had they just been freed from enslavement that they worried that would be back to, not only were some looked at as nothing more than a food source, which they were afraid they were still going to be nothing but now their entire planet had been struck and they're almost at the edge of extinction again. But he was able to bring them together. With that, humans worked as diligently as they could to make sure the entire Toes population survived. This cleaning up, this rebuilding, along with the refit of the Trippy station was, well, a long process. The Trippy is actually about 5 times the size of the human's moon Luna, which meant there's a lot of corridors. There's a lot of debris to be picked up. There's a lot of bodies to throw out into the void or into the reassembler so they can be turned into food later. There's also the fact that everything needs to be cleaned, sanitized, and all the electronics that had been destroyed on the way through had to be completely redone. This would take years. Years upon years, stretching into several decades, and within that time, they did not hear from the Ponchu at all. Everyone thought that the Ponchu had just cut their losses, or maybe they're reinforcing the other colonies, but every time they checked, it seemed like without the Trippy station, they had nothing. They needed to bring everything in via convoys, and that took a lot longer when you didn't have a large distribution center, which was action packed with resources. All different types of materials, from cooking materials to housing materials to foodstuffs and everything else. Everything was there. In fact, so much was there that it was shipped over to the Toe's homeworld and aided in construction, actually sped up constructions by at least 2 to 3 times faster than anybody could have thought. And most of humanity thought about this. The Ponchu had thought to take over the Toes, to turn them into nothing but a slave race, to make them food, and now all the resources are going to help them thrive. The irony was not lost on anyone. Approximately 2 decades later, the Trippy station may have looked about the same from the outside, but now with a lot of human sweat and a whole bunch of human ingenuity, it was now a fully armed and operational battle station with its own main guns. This was something, again, you couldn't see from the outside, but made it look like a very, very juicy target. This is why many of the human fleets were still there. No less than 2 fleets were there at any given time. This made sure that there was actually several dreadnoughts and several battleships as well, always within reach to protect that station. Everybody knew how important this one spot in the known universe was. And after only been up and running for several months, they received the first notification from the Ponchu. The very first one. It was a message, not a voice message. Everyone looked at it and read, "We acknowledge you as predators. We acknowledge your strength. We do not want further bloodshed. We are looking forward to any type of armistice so that we may once again feed our own, so that we may reach out once again, so that we can thrive as we once did. Allow us to come and discuss." This was a surprise to everybody. They didn't think the Ponchu would actually do this. Say, hey, why not? They're being hospitable. Why the hell wouldn't they actually come in? We kicked their ass so many times. Maybe they finally learned. Let's do this. So the location was chosen. The location was Trippy. It was the only place that everybody knew of. Everybody knew that a delegation could land there without any issue. There was plenty of space, no pun intended, to make sure that they could land without issue. And they also knew that, well, let's face it, the Ponchu would know how to get to the conference room. Of course, they built the damn thing. When it came time, the Ponchu came through the drift. Only one ship. Only one single ship. They asked for coordinates, and they were told to head towards Trippy itself. With that, the Ponchu denied this, and everyone was confused. They said that was hostile territory, and that is not how negotiations are done. Everybody was, okay, what's going on? The Admiral, of course, was very, very confused and said, "Which location do you choose?" And with that, the Ponchu sent again another message in their own language, which had to be translated to text because, well, most of what they say can't be understood or spoken as a human. When everyone read it, they said it is customary to meet aboard the flagship. They were confused, and everybody immediately had all sorts of warning lights going off in their head, but they scanned the ship and there was no weapons on it. They wondered, okay, are they up to something, or is this hospitable? In order to make sure there was peace, no human actually wanted to arm their weapons or lock onto the ship because it was just a small ship, barely a frigate class. The Ponchu were told to go to the cargo bay of the Emerald Talon, one of the dreadnoughts that was out there. as they got into the bay. Everyone held their breath as they hoped that the talks would go well and they could finally relax for once. 30 seconds later, they didn't have to worry about the talks. The ship itself was used as a bomb and detonated inside the cargo vessel. They had overloaded the reaction drive, and everybody should have realized it's a reaction drive, not a gravity drive. No wonder they wanted to use this. The reaction drive exploded with so much force that it did not destroy the dreadnought, but it blew out most of the starboard side. A piece of the ventral section was just gone, and there was enough force in the explosion to actually bend the whole body of the ship. Not to the point where it folded in on itself, and only just a few degrees, but it was enough. That ship was completely unusable, and now it's right in the center of the human formation. Before anybody had a chance to even figure out what in the hell just happened, even though they kind of knew what just happened, everyone's sensors went absolutely nuts. And from the drift, here came the Ponchu. By the hundreds, by the thousands, what seemed by the millions, they flooded in through that small aperture in space. They came in, weapons blazing, and everybody had already armed their weapons. Everybody had let loose, and before anybody knew it, space was on fire. On fire from energy weapons of all sorts from the Ponchu, mainly their energy weapons that struck out against ships, shocking systems causing them to overload and brown out, causing them to go adrift. Many of the smaller Ponchus actually tried to charge into the dreadnoughts, trying to get into their cargo bays, not realizing that those bays are exceptionally armored. And when they went to charge in through the doors, they found themselves flattening against the sides. Though they would definitely damage the doors, possibly break them, they would not actually break through. Out of the dozens of attempts that were made, only one was successful, and it stripped the ship that came through. The Ponchu ship that went through was also a frigate class, designed to be sharp like a knife, and just happened to hit the seam absolutely perfect. But when it did, all the exterior paneling was ripped off. As it went through, it was like the Teflon coating of an armor-piercing bullet. And before anyone inside realized, they were fully exposed as they went out like bugs being kicked out of an anthill. Well, the internal security was ready. Not only were the automated systems cutting them apart, but those who worked in the bay were not going to be pushed over, not by some sparky little rat. As many of them jumped up to get on an unarmored human, the human would reach over with a piece of equipment and bat them off to the side, sending them flying across the room. Many of them as their way across as the pain went through. Some, all you heard was a sickening crunch as they simply went limp all the way across. Many of them sat there and said, "That's a double. That's going to be a triple. Home run!" as they kept laughing their way right through the Ponchu. Yet the Ponchu did not give up. In fact, they got angrier and angrier. It seems like some of them who were hit did not stay down. They just jumped up, grabbed on any piece of electronics they could, zapped the living crap out of it, made sure that it was non-functional, then went towards another human. And when they got through, they zapped with enough bioelectricity that that human would simply lock up and then fall over. And as they did, the Ponchu just moved on to someone else as smoke, not steam, but actual smoke, came out of the mouth, nose, and even the eyes. Though a valiant effort by the Ponchu, their numbers were whittled down extremely fast, but this was not the only trick they had up their sleeve. They dipped, dive, and dodged, and now all the ships were at point-blank range, right where the Ponchu wanted them, and they used their new energy weapons, which used their bioelectricity as more of a laser, more focused, and this caused more damage and more casualties, but humanity was ready. As Ponchus began to flow out of the drift, they launched everything. All their point defenses were locked on. Every tertiary offensive weapons had already been turned, and now the Ponchu were so close, these would come into play. The main and secondary weapons were already primed and began to light up anything coming towards the drift. In fact, many of the primary weapons, especially turreted weapons, were aimed towards the drift itself. Not the biggest aperture, but enough that if people fired directly at it, just kept it going, they'd be able to catch most of the Ponchu as they exited the hole. And the Ponchu that were trying to come through the drift had no idea how good humans were at penetrating the hole. Those that had made it through were slicing and dicing along with being sliced and diced themselves. Many times, once they had nothing left on their weapons, they would kamikaze into human ships. It was a complete and total melee at point blank range, yet humanity's ships are bracketed at all ranges. It didn't matter if they got close. They were still getting perforated by thousands upon thousands of tungsten slugs that were going right through their ships, right through their systems, right through them. Many ships just went adrift, and if one wasn't watching, the massive debris field that was piling up would cause more problems than the actual firefight. Many of the smaller corvettes would use them as defensive measures, yet it's kind of hard to use something defensive when it's still flying right at you, or what's left of a ship is coming right at you. Most of the cruisers or higher could not get out of the way of the debris, and most of them were taking damage from all the strikes, many of them rotating around not only to avoid massive damage to one side, but also allowing their weapons to cool. This strange rotation was something the Ponchu did not quite understand. Well, a few might, right before they got blasted right in the face. Yet this turned out to be only the secondary objective. They were not trying to clear out humanity. That would have been great. But their actual target was Trippy itself. Another couple hundred ships broke away as soon as possible, went straight towards the Trippy planet, moving in erratic ways to make sure they didn't get struck, all of them having missiles and torpedoes closing faster and faster behind them. Many of the Ponchu obviously on the level of fuck it, as they jammed their throttles as fast as they could and went straight into the Trippy station, many of them right into the bays, trying to turn around and turn their engines on as fast as possible, doing a flip and burn, trying desperately to slow down enough where they're not going to go splat on the far wall of the bays. The Trippy station's exterior was always energy shields or open bays, and because of that, the Ponchu could get in at least that far. And when they did, they had the equipment they believed would get them through the doors. And they did. Using their own bioelectricity, they were able to use a type of torch that went right through blast doors in a matter of minutes, sometimes less than a minute. It seemed as though they could simply shove part of their torch around it, spin it around fairly quick, and then pull the torch out. And as long as that metal was still molten and they got a good head enough start, they could actually strike and knock that as though they were uncorking a bottle. And then they would flood in all around the area looking for anyone to tear apart. That was once again when the CQB came to play, and everyone in the Trippy station knew this was a possibility, and everyone was ready. Everyone was in suits. Everyone was using the corridors to try and force the Ponchu down different corridors that were set to explode if need be, to vent if need be, but were also covered in weapons. In one or two instances, the Ponchu went down one corridor, over 200 of them at a time, and suddenly all they saw was a bunch of weapons coming out the walls, the upper and lower decks, and then the doors in front would open, and there's a line of humans on their knees, and then another line of humans standing up behind them, and they just hear the last thing they're going to hear: fire. And with that, the burst of lead that came through shredded everything. The walls would have to be repainted or completely sanitized again. The bodies piled up more and more and more, as though there's some sort of NPC character in a game where they just kept coming through the door over and over again, damming the torpedoes as though they believed that eventually humanity would run out of ammunition. And they were right. inside the station. Many were actually running low on ammo. The ammo they had was larger caliber ammunition. It was meant to punch through 2, 3, 4 at a time. It was also meant to be able to take out a human in a suit. They needed something of a faster rate of speed, something more chain-fed, something ready to cut these creatures apart. Yet those weapons were considered antiques, and they didn't have any of them. And because of that, the Ponchu eventually got so close that they were able to grab a hold of the weapons, tearing them apart that came out of the walls, send their own bioelectricity through, and short them out. This allowed them to get up to the doors and once again cut through them. But once on the other side, if humans were out of ammo, that did not mean they were unarmed. They forgot that humans, when up close and personal, they laugh because you can't spell slaughter without laughter. One of the humans actually went through, used an extending blade that came out of each of their forearms, and began cutting every single one of the Ponchu to pieces as soon as they came through. It was absolutely horrible. He kept screaming, "You shall not pass!" as he started slicing and dicing and doing all sorts. At one point, somebody looked and said, "Holy crap, dude, you got crinkle cut going in that shit too?" At that point, the one who was slicing and dicing started to run low on energy himself, yet his suit kept him going. Other places, the Ponchu ended up against energy shields. Though these energy shields would burn themselves out after about a minute or two, it was still enough to stop them cold. Also, the force of the energy shield was just like hitting against solid metal. This caused many of them to go absolutely splat against the wall. And also, the energy shield had another bonus. Every time a Ponchu zapped it, it fed the shield and simply made it stronger. Outside the station, Reish Ren had brought in not only his frigate the Ajnu, but every single one of the ships that he could. He needed to be there, and they had lined up in a spindle formation just on the outside of the human formation. And as the explosion first started, he ordered his ships forward, and he ordered them, "Kill them all." And they did. It takes a lot to impress humanity. And when a pacifist species like this decides that they've got no more fucks to give and they go full no fucks mode, it can impress humanity. And with that, it actually inspired the humans to push even farther. They got right up at point blank range to the drift as they took out as many of the Ponchu ships that were coming through. People wondered, is there any end to them? They're wasting so many ships and so many lives. Do they even care? And then most realized, no, they really don't care. Their whole species is based on dominance. And since we have taken something from them, they think that is an insult, even though it wasn't theirs to begin with. They stole it first. We took it back, and they want to, quote unquote, get even just like any other bully. And humanity hates bullies. With that, they pushed all the way to the drift, and as the Ponchu ships piddled out or drifted down to zero, everyone wondered, is that going to be it? Keeping their weapons focused on the drift just in case. They called in to the Trippy station to see what the hell was going on, and all they could hear was silence. For a moment, everyone thought that the Ponchu had actually got all the way to the command center. Perhaps they had done something to take over the station, and with that, multiple ships were launched. Anyone who still had a Corvette was sent over into the Trippy station. They landed in the docks. They ran out, weapons drawn, going down the hallway, seeing all the carnage that was there, the blood, the guts, the mayhem. Every once in a while, finding a human, at least what was left of them in a suit, and making all the way to the command center. But before they even got there, the bodies ran out. What they found made them happy. They were greeted by other humans, most of which who were covered in blood, many of them feeling a little off as they had got a couple zaps directly into their suit. But the suits had been upgraded, thankfully for them. However, a few still had some serious nerve damage. Others were actually just stuck in their suits, and others were trying to get them out of the suits before they simply ran out of oxygen. Breaking a seal was enough to make sure that they could breathe, but they still had to get them out of the suits. The suits need more than a simple jumpstart at that point. They need to be completely stripped down and rebuilt. But as long as you're alive, who gives a shit, as one human said. It was then that it was found out that the communication array had actually been overrun by the Ponchu, and that's why nobody had heard anything. Everybody inside the Trippy station, with their simple communications in their suits, couldn't actually get through the surface to let everybody know it was okay. Many of those that had gone in and seen that Trippy was still under human control hurried up to the exterior, got on their own Corvettes, and sent a message that said, "All clear." That is when everybody finally unclenched, at least partially unclenched. They looked at what had happened. This was nothing more than an ambush. This was actually a coordinated ambush. They had set off an explosion trying to shatter one of the largest ships, put it out of commission, and send a debris field. That way they could use that as cover to get close. A very, very smart idea. Not to mention they arrived with so many forces that it wouldn't matter how many guns we have. You just can't take them all down at once. And everyone was so close to the drift at that point that it was going to become a knife fight anyway, which is exactly what the Ponchu wanted. Everyone looked at their losses as well, and the losses were not devastating. They were not catastrophic, but they were severe. Once again, most ships would have to be completely refit before they were able to go into action again. Multiple dreadnoughts were out of commission completely. Not only the one that had been exploded from the inside, but a few of the Ponchu had actually kamikazed straight into the engine section and detonated. This caused a ripple effect that unfortunately damaged many of the engines beyond repair, and the ship would have to be completely scrapped. It could not be repaired. Even the tows did not get away unscathed, as they lost 38% of their forces. Their whatever fighting power they could muster had also been almost crippled. Though Rejren still had his frigate, even though it's going to take some serious repairs, he was still ready to fight. And at this point, as much as a pacifist as he used to be, he no longer is one. He wanted to take his forces straight into Ponchu territory, and he wanted to tear him a new asshole. Yet, every single commander told him to stop. You cannot simply attack in rage. You have to think this through. Rejren and the rest of his people were not exactly happy about this, but cooler heads did prevail. When he asked the humans when they were going to go after the Ponchu, or if they would even go after the Ponchu, almost as though he was daring them, almost though he was insulting them, saying that humanity did not have the scrotes to actually go at them, that is when the Admiral got on the horn and said, "Listen up here, you horned bastard. I want you to listen to this and listen close. They just attacked us over a white flag. You don't do that. This was meant to be peaceful. This was supposed to end the war. And what did they do? They waited till our backs were turned and they shoved a knife in it. You don't do that. They have done something you do not want to do when you're trying to bring peace, and that is betrayed us. We don't look too kindly on that. So, take this to the bank. We're going to lick our wounds. We're going to refit. And then we're going to show them what happens when you don't come to humanity with a little bit of hospitality in mind." Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you for joining me today on part 8 of this ongoing series. Now before I go, I need to say that today's winner is MTF Guard, with Prozac and Pancakes coming in a very close second. And I also need to send out some really special thank yous to the supporters of this channel, and they are Prozac and Pancakes, Steve Ewig, Erica Gem, SS Demon, Guardian Sage, MTF Guard, Brian Kemp, Douglas Scarborough, Joseph Blosh, and Julius Boone. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax.
Ejecting pilot.